Hello, everybody. Welcome to Valois Dark Arts for those seeking deeper meaning in the dark. And I'm Nero de Valois, and I will be your guide on this little journey. Quick side note before we roll into today's topic. I mentioned this on the business page for De Valois Spiritual Services. I have been butchering the name. As you can hear, I'm actually pronouncing it right. It is no longer De Valois, it is De Valois. I've been anglicizing that. So, many apologies. I don't believe I have any sort of French-speaking followers here yet, but it's important that I sort of address that before I deeply offend somebody. I am an American English speaker from, I guess you would say, very French areas of the South, with French influences. I would say not as much as Louisiana, but still very French, so hence part of the reasoning of choosing that name. But I'm not a native French speaker, so that's part of the reason I was messing that up. So please forgive me. That's going to be fixed from now on. But all the same, Nero de Valois here with De Valois Dark Arts, ready to kind of help you along with things. Now, I did have a longer, sort of elaborate sort of topic set up for today. This is actually my second time trying to record this, and I realized sort of just how intense my subject matter was, and I've decided to kind of trim it down and then have everything else sort of divided up. So this is going to be about gods, just gods. The next two episodes, I really want to go into specifics about sort of general spirits, sort of fae, whites, demons, thought forms, and then have the episode after that sort of focusing on ancestors and the dead. I may flip those around depending on what my mood is, but that's kind of what the episode lineup is looking like as far as what the topic is. So we're going on the second take and really wanting to make sure that I actually properly instruct you guys, focusing primarily on my notes on gods. That got really intense as I was trying to record this the first time, so I'm really going to focus more on that. I feel like it would be better. So yeah, here's to me actually admitting that yes, this is the second take of me recording this, but I wanted to let you guys know that's where things are going. And this series is very much a work in progress still. I will totally own that. So that's a lot of why things are the way they are right now. Okay. So getting into the subject today is gods. Gods and deities sort of interacting with this aspect of the spirit world and what exactly that involves. Honestly, if you're agnostic or atheistic, it's very much a mental exercise. So if you're of that particular worldview, I would kind of take everything I say from here on out with a grain of salt. If you're not, if you are sort of spiritually aware or open to these things, it's people of that particular sort of orientation that I'm really aiming this towards, as far as what gods are, how to develop relationships with them, how to talk to them. So, what are gods? Gods are literally defined as divine beings with, obviously divine powers. If you look at it in a sort of Judeo-Christian sense, it's very much a overarching, omniscient kind of presence. Speaking from a pagan perspective, that's a lot different. In the pagan perspective, with the gods kind of having their respective natural spheres, these things that they manifest from, it's very much less so. So you have a god like Thor, who is the thunderer, who brings the rains, who is very much a manifestation of that aspect. That's literally what he is. And on the inverse side, you have a very sort of far-reaching god like Odin, who is sort of the manifestation of the greater life force, the pushing, the spark of life, so to speak, and sort of all of his various aspects coming out of that. So it ranges from something very specific like you would have with Thor, and then something sort of wide-reaching that you would have with Odin. So that's kind of going into sort of the pagan definition of gods, sort of the range of what we're dealing with. And there are sort of pantheistic elements there, especially in my interpretation and in many... I'm sorry, my voice keeps cracking for some reason. In other forms of paganism as well, especially with polytheism. And the next point is, are the gods real? Now, there's two different perspectives on this. The first one is that the gods are manifestations from our minds. They're something that we have sort of created humanly. You see this a lot with sort of non-theistic pagans and atheistic pagans. Very much the perspective referencing sort of popular culture. A lot of how things are interpreted in Neil Gaiman's American Gods, which is extraordinarily popular. As far as sort of gods being emanations from humanity. And then you have sort of the opposing view, which goes back into, the what are the gods comment, where like these are actually natural forces. And therefore, they are what they are. Now, there's an important distinction as far as the manifestations of gods. Depending on sort of soft versus hard polytheism, sort of straight polytheism versus henotheism, where are gods emanations from a single energy that aren't really individuals, or are they actually sort of distinct individuals? Now, I tend to take a moderate view on that. With my sensitivities, I do see sort of gods emanating from a greater energy. There goes my voice cracking again. I'm sorry. There's a lot of sickness going around, so my voice is trying to die. So that's rather annoying. So, there's definitely that distinction of soft versus hard polytheism as far as, what they actually are. Is this, you have on one hand, this is the expression of the divine feminine, and all goddesses come from one goddess, and that kind of thing, very much sort of the Wiccan, sort of soft polytheistic. And then you have the hard polytheistic on the other side, which is more of the heathen, like, the gods are all distinctly individuals, and there's really no direct links between the two, other than sort of you would have with normal human interactions. I end up taking more of a moderate view on that. Again, going back to what I was saying earlier, where I interact with sort of a greater spiritual force with my certain sensitivities, but at the same time, having worked with various deities of various cultures and pantheons, seeing them interact as individuals and work together and work against each other, it definitely appears to me that just like you have sort of families of gods that end up a lot of times working together, you also have sort of guilds where they all have similar functions, so they tend to get along well. That's not necessarily the case, given, again, the gods do all have their own distinct personalities. So you can't have gods at odds with each other, sometimes within a single space. I've actually had that happen to me personally. Now, my original intention was actually going into the specifics of that story, but I feel like I probably ought to save that for the last part of the episode, so I think that's what I'm going to do. So I'll get back to that story in a minute to sort of get into a sort of a vivid explanation of how gods work. How do gods appear? Gods appear a lot of times based on how you perceive them and how their reality is to you, like how, what makes them real. If you're somebody who is of the sort of non-theistic variation, it's very much going to be an internal experience for you, where it's like, I'm dealing with this entity in my head, it's around my instincts. I actually have a good friend that has mentioned that that's how he interacts with his particular god. If you're of a theistic manner, it can end up being a lot more vivid, a a lot more personal, especially if you are, again, going back to terms here of the more hard polytheistic variety. How do you talk to the gods? Regardless of where you fall on the spectrum, everyone pretty much talks to the gods the same way. You talk, you pray, you sort of show deference respectfully, to whatever degree you feel comfortable. There's definitely a debate sort of between the left-hand path and the right-hand path about, how you should do that. Luciferians are very much, we're working with this spirit either in a commanding way or we're just sort of forming an alliance and that kind of thing. And then you have a lot of, and even some pagans act that way, especially as far as, we don't kneel before our gods. We work with them as sort of greater ancestors and that kind of thing. And then you have the other end, sort of on the right-hand path, where it's showing deference and showing a deep respect. Almost to the point where you're treating the gods like you would if you would still be in a Judeo-Christian situation. So there's definitely a range there. And it's more of a spectrum, not a dichotomy. How do the gods talk to me? That goes back to a lot of the manifestations that I was talking about. If it's something more internal for you, then that's how the gods are going to talk to you. The gods are very much going to go in such a way that is something that you're open to. The more open you are to something, the more likely they are to sort of use it. If you are of sort of that hard polytheistic bent, that's something you believe in, will sort of manifest very vividly that way. To be perfectly real, I've kind of bounced all over when it comes to these manifestations and these sort of experiences of the gods. When I was first starting out as a pagan, I very much was of almost the non-theistic or even soft polytheistic. To a certain degree, I still am of the soft polytheistic bent, but I've become slightly more moderate as I've gotten older and more matured and my experiences have continued. So I was kind of all goddesses are one god and all gods are one god, that kind of thing, right? Because I had very Wiccan roots. Now my opinions are more of the fact where, and I think I mentioned this earlier, where the gods, you have families of gods and you kind of have guilds of gods where they all do sort of similar aspects. And it became, especially in the past couple of years, has become much more literal for me. Because the spirit world is so ambiguous and amorphous, it's really hard to say it's literal. Because there's always going to be that sort of psychological barrier and the boundaries between the worlds and stuff. So I'm not so literalist. I definitely don't consider myself fundamentalist in the fact that I don't see how a lot of what I've been experiencing could be coming from my own mind. So, again, I take a moderate view on a lot of these things. And my last point was on relationships with the gods. A lot of people, and I'm guilty of this, will run into a relationship with a particular deity and really not know, excuse me, my voice is cracking, really not know really what they're after or what they're looking for, or really how these things work. And one thing I've tried to imply in how I describe the gods is it's very much how you would deal with people. Sort of as above, so below. Just like you would deal with people and creatures in this world, you need to act a very similar way with people and creatures in the other world. So you develop relationships very much the same way. People talk about offerings and gift givings, and just like you have to take several years to really get to know somebody, it's going to take you several years to get to know a god. So there's a lot of, my voice keeps cracking. There's definitely a lot of work that goes into that. So, I'm going to end with this story that I talked about as far as sort of the vividness of relationships with God. And I've implied that I can be very eclectic and I work with a lot of different things. And the most recent instance of this being very much manifesting in how I sort of work with different spirits was I had actually had a conflict between two of the deities that I was working with in my sacred space, to the point where the two of my primary patrons were like, no, get this particular goddess out of here. It's not going to work. Like, that's actually something that can happen, where you can have a sort of conflict, even if you think they're going to get along, simply because of the personalities being so variant, that you can have those kind of conflicts between deities. That does happen. And that's really a final point that I wanted to mention going forward, is that things do tend to surprise you on this path, and I'm definitely no exception. So that's kind of the summation of what I wanted to talk about when it comes to gods. If anybody has any questions or any suggestions as far as the show, I do apologize. Going back to my first point, I was mangling my name. My voice has been sort of screwing up the entirety of this episode as well. There's been some serious gunk going around here in Central Texas that's been messing with me, so I do apologize for that. I still hope I was clear and everyone actually, learned something. If you have any, like I said, if you have any questions, please reach out to me, either on YouTube or on Facebook. And if there's any construction criticism you might have for the show, or just something you're interested in learning, please let me know, and I will definitely see about getting it up here. So, Near de Valois out. I hope to see y'all soon.